business weekend? Well, the government set aside $33 billion over 10 years, mainly through extra funding for the Help to Buy scheme to help home building. But look, home building stats show it's still way behind its target of 1.2 million new homes by the end of the decade. Edward Boyd investigates.
Cost of living is the major issue for voters at this election, and the biggest cost of all is housing. Affordability is at record lows and rents are close to record highs.
Hello, welcome to MzansiOz Diary. My name is Connie. If you're new here, you're very much welcome. So today we're talking about this housing crisis in Australia. As you all may be aware that we're going to have election on the 3rd of May next month. So major political party, which is the Labor Party, current in government. Prime Minister is Albanese. And then we have the opposition, Peter Dutton, who is in the Liberal Party. They've presented their own options around sorting our housing crisis here in Australia. So as I've posted a couple of videos around housing crisis, we have a crisis in both rental and also buying houses. People can't afford houses in Australia because house prices have risen so much higher than the income relative to income. So the proposal is between the two major parties. The current government has proposed Help to Buy scheme, share equity.
Labor will expand the eligibility requirements for its Help to Buy scheme, allowing people with slightly higher incomes to access the shared equity scheme, where the government becomes a part owner in their property. It's also set aside $33 billion in the recent federal budget for housing.
Meaning taxpayer shared an equity of a person that buys a house. That I've already alluded the risk to it, and we've already seen the risk already with what's going on in the bond market and everything that's going on in America, and the tariffs potentially to China, what that can have an impact on Australian economy, because China is our biggest trading partners. China is still number one trading partner for Australia. China is still number one trading partner for South Africa. So it is very important that you pay attention to what's going on, because if China's work with this 125% tariff, that has an implication how that can potentially influence South Africa and or Australia economically, vice versa. So there are, there are opportunity as well there. And I think I'll put a video about that, how that may play out around opportunities around these tariffs, because, when you have losers, there are people going to benefit. So today we're talking about this housing. So the opposition, they've also have their own. Peter Dutton has his own policy.
Thank you. How are you?
Meanwhile, the coalition want APRA to reduce its home loan serviceability buffer from 3% to increase borrowing power. They will also allow first home buyers to access up to $50,000 of their super to buy a home. The coalition have also pledged $5 billion to build essential infrastructure at housing development sites.
So his policy around housing is to allow young people to be able to access their super. So that one also has its own problem. 50,000 Australian dollars to be accessed to purchase a home for a young person as a deposit. So super is like your retirement annuity. You're South African, you wonder what super is, retirement annuity. If you're American, super is like your 401k. So people to access it and use that money to as a deposit for their home. So they have framed this housing crisis as a deposit issue. But as I've said in the last video, when we had that analyst who was explaining really well about, it's not actually a deposit issue. It's an income to debt ratio. That is a big issue around it. But because of the income to debt ratio is so large, it's more than 5 times, the bank wouldn't even loan a person, even if the person has the deposit. That is why many people don't get a loan. But because of this Help to Buy scheme, then they can buy a house, and the taxpayer can help them to buy a home by giving them that difference. Say a house is $820,000 because the bank can only loan about 5 times of their annual income. So that means that 320,000 would be amount that will be a taxpayer money, a loan that the taxpayer would then borrow money, use the credit card, and then give it to that person, and then so that person can have a loan at the bank, which then the loan bank will be 500,000 because that's how their income is 5 times the borrowing. So that is where the issue is. Help to Buy will have that. It's only going to help about limited number of people, 10,000. And also they want to expand it to people who are earning more, meaning people who are earning more than 120, from 100 to 120, 150. I don't know how far, but we know that they want to expand it from to the top range of income.
Labor also want to provide more financial support directly to apprentices to stimulate the construction sector. Meanwhile, the coalition will provide support directly to employers who are hiring the apprentices.
But the thing is, the more they expand it, the more house price goes up. As I've alluded in the last video where I was talking about property, that already the house price have gone up since this policy was announced.
The reality of a lot of these promises by both Labor and the coalition is that I don't think they're going to dramatically shift the dial. When we look at things like Help to Buy scheme, there aren't that many places announced. And then if we look at the coalition's plan to let people access their super, typically people don't necessarily have enough in their super if they're in that first home buyer cohort. So while it's good to see the focus is on housing and helping people get into the housing market, the reality is it's still going to be really tough out there, even with these policies.
And again, you can see the problem there is that the deposit is so small. And so you wouldn't be able to buy a house if you have 50,000, which house you can buy, for $50,000 deposit. I mean, if the house price is about 820,000, if you can only access 50,000 Australian dollars from your super, that also leaves you with another, say 30 to 40,000 Australian dollars that you need to be able to get your deposit for buy that 820,000 Australian dollars house, average house, median house. But also you have a problem again, which is your debt to income ratio is too low. So you're not gonna, with that policy, there's a lot of things that it's just very risky. Another risky is that you're using your super early. What if, you're removing your super from that investment market where you can earn your money to get some debt when you need it during retirement? What happened then? So what it does is actually undermine the super as well. This thing undermine the super. The Liberals have already had problem anyway. They've many years around trying to meddle around super and not wanting. People have super. We know the history around the Libs and super, what they have about it. So it's one of the ways that they want to undermine super anyway. That's how I view it anyway. That's the way to undermine it. It's risky as well. So renters, they haven't got anything for renters, nothing immediately. And we've seen that vacancy rate in South Australia alone has gone, it's around 0.6. That is extremely, that means there's no houses in South Australia to rent. That gives me to another second thing around houses. So if the houses, we got no houses to rent, and we've stopped foreigners from buying established homes. So when we got about 250,000 migrants in February alone, where are they going to live? You see why this issue around housing in Australia, it has come to the point whereby they have to face it. It's just there at that critical stage where somebody needs to pull the pin and stop this nonsense, because I don't see where they're going to find houses, the migrants who are going to come to Australia. If you're migrants, you're thinking you're going to come to Australia next year, you better make sure that your rental is already set up for you. You already have a rental place before you land in any of our major airport, because you're going to be one of those people, like the story that I showed you of a South African woman who been homeless for 2.5 years and living in this short-term accommodation with 2 kids. So you don't want to be in that situation, as I told. So the vacancy rate for rental in South Australia is 0.6 according to CoreLogic. So yeah, there's no houses there to rent. 0.6 means that there's more people looking for a house to rent than there are available rental properties. So when they continue with this higher number of immigrants coming to Australia, the issue now is going to be where they're going to house them. So there's many people that I hear harrowing story of migrants being homeless, couch surfing people's homes and being helped by a non-profit organization. Those migrants who can tolerate those are people who are desperate. Middle and high skilled migrants won't tolerate that. Many of them actually have returned back to their countries because of what I just explained now, that the housing issue in Australia, it has become an issue that it's actually going to stop the economy. It's going to impede on the economy, meaning that the country is not going to get skilled migrants and when they do get skilled migrants, the skilled migrants likely to be leaving Australia and going elsewhere because of the housing. So they will leave because, who would want to, example, move from South Africa where they've got a golf course, the house, the property is about 2,500 square feet, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and a golf course, and come in to live with strangers. Who want to do that? Most people wouldn't want to do that. So most people under that middle income to high skilled migrant won't actually tolerate that kind of lifestyle. So you can see from then that the housing itself is going to determine the type of migrants Australia will have, are those who will be able to live in those slum type of situation where there is many people in the houses. And yeah, it's not good. And also the same housing is going to influence about whether Australians are going to have kids or not as well. And also the housing also is going to influence about how many, whether the city is going to have young people living there or not. And we can see that through New South Wales with a lot of exit from New South Wales, from the data that young people are living in New South Wales because they can't afford to rent there. When they live there, they have over 60% of their income pays just the rent. So you can see, again, there's a problem. Everything around is surrounded by housing. So I don't see any policy that is broad enough to look at these issues, that looks at housing broadly, not just, I've got a good plan and you guys elect me for the next election for the next 3 years. All of these policies about enticing people to be elected, they just not setting Australia on a different path, and path of success, path of where Australia would be compared with other countries like Finland and stuff, because of our Gini coefficients, because Australia's Gini coefficients has declined very quickly since became an Australian citizen. People now, you can see now between rich and poor, the gap is become wider and wider and wider. And so still, echo the same thing when you read any economics books anyway. That tells you, if you read economics book like I do, you will know that, higher migration doesn't actually increase any wages for the citizens. It actually reduces the standard of living for the citizens. But higher migration is also a tax break for businesses as well. That's why business like it, because they're getting a tax break. And I think I may have to explain that in the next some videos. But I think I've explained before because of the wages don't rise as quick. And because wages don't rise, then it's a form of tax break. Because if the wages were going up, because there are not many skilled labor, so that profession would need to increase the wage to entice people. Then that's where the issue becomes an issue for businesses, because then they're not earning more money, more income, more profit. They're not making any profit. All their income, vast of the income, goes to paying that wage. So this is how economics works anyway. And also another thing that you have to be aware of, when labor, goes on and say, oh, we're going to have, we're going to increase, your wage is going to rise, but then they have 250,000 new migrants in Australia in 1 month alone, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. They're just lying. They're just bluffing. Dululu. Dululu. When they say that, you say dululu. That's all you have to say. Dululu. They're just bluffing. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So they could say that. They say all of that stuff because, it's gonna, people like to see their wages go up, but you need to ask this question, how? When you know, what most economists say, this is what's gonna happen. You can pick up any book, economics book, and read it yourself if you like to read. It's gonna happen that way. It's just demand and supply. That's all we have, demand and supply. So if you got more supply of one thing, which is labor, hire migrants into the community. So there is a higher, there is actually more supply in terms of the labor force. We have the higher supply of a labor force. So wage is not going to be increasing. It's going to remain stagnant. That is just an economics principle that I'm pointing out. So any of the politicians that are telling you, especially on the left side of the aisle, that are saying that you're going to see a wage rise when they have 250,000 people in 1 month in Australia, is dululu. Dululu, okay? That's not going to happen. So that's where we are with the housing. So this is my rant for the housing in Australia. And we're going to hear a couple of those, people saying about this housing from now on until the election, but nothing that's pursuing me either way anyway. But I will talk about housing because there's other parties that have different housing policy, and I'll give you some pros and cons about them as well. But so far, whatever Labor is going to do about housing is similar to what they've done in the past. They haven't done anything around their supply. And even the coalition, which is Peter Dutton, their lips, they haven't done anything around supply. Nothing they've proposed is going to help with the supply. So they also have proposed something around young people to go into construction. The Labor wants to pay the young people to go into construction, while the Liberal wants to pay the businesses. Okay. So young people to go into construction will help if you pay them to when they are doing this construction study. They're actually going to help increasing the labor force around construction. But it doesn't guarantee that those people are going to be useful in order to learn the skill to become very competent builder. So when you pay for, say for example, you pay for a business that is going to accept a person who's going to study, who's going to do construction, meaning doing that internship into their business, that can actually help in entice the business owner to actually teach the person to learn how to build. But he also needs to have a good regulatory monitoring system around whether people that are there actually learning to become builder are not being used as another profitarian for the businesses. So that proposal is gonna be really scrutinized in terms of how they're gonna monitor whether the young person who's been given that a position in that business would actually land to build a house. And the businesses aren't going to use it as the tick boxes and get a person just to do something that is not going to earn them any skills upon finishing the program. They're not going to be able to be a builder straight away because they didn't learn anything, because they just a number tick box for the business owner to actually increase, reduce their cost of running business. So it's got a very severe issue around that, around the skill set, the one we're talking about, which is related to Peter Dutton's policy. But the one that Labour has proposed, it will actually entice many people to enter that construction side, which is great because we don't have enough builders. But the other one that Peter Dutton proposed, yes, it's good for business, but it may not be good for a person who is going to be learning, because it has a potential to be misused. So, see? Think about that. Unless that one for Peter Dutton has actually some kind of a regulatory monitoring system, and actually also to ensure that a person is learning all the skills for building. There's a program that is run to ensure that if a business owner is getting that money, they have responsibility to ensure that the person meets those competency. And there's another system that's going to monitor the competencies of those builders under that scheme, that are they up to the standard that's required in Australia. So if you do that, then you're likely really to get good skills in that program, because business will definitely spend more time. They're paid to do it. But it also doesn't mean that people then would want to enter that profession, because they're not getting paid anyway. So one increases demand into the profession, but the other one increases business to attract business. It's actually reward the businesses to accept young people, but it doesn't guarantee the skill. So those are the stuff they propose. I have no issue around either one of them, but I have an extremely problem around the business one, because I know that definitely could be misused. Believe me, you could definitely, that one has a very high potential to be misused without any the policy needs to have some safeguarding around it. Okay, so if it has some safeguarding around not just giving business money, but how they're going to ensure that the skills is learned during that period, then that one is actually I think it's potentially to be the winner of the two. So around, there's nothing for housing, even for renters. None of them haven't proposed anything around renters, even though the renters are the one that are suffering right now. The renters are the one that are impacted by this high number of immigrants who are coming to Australia because of the lack of new houses that available for on the market. So renters are actually feeling it more than people who are buying, who can't afford to buy houses. That there's nothing on the table at the moment that I'm aware of. If you guys know any policies around the two major parties, please let me know. And I've got I don't know. It looks like this election will be the only elections that I will have to look at the third party and see what the other third parties have, the independent and other third party, what sort of policy they have around housing, because I don't want to see housing that is the band-aid. We need to move away from band-aid housing policy to a broader housing policy that addresses everything that I spoke about. Young people in the community, affordability, people who are, who can't work, with disability, that is actually broad enough to manage the crisis that we've created ourselves, really. So nothing on the table. And the number one issue around that is, for me, it's housing. Number one. Of all the stuff around, the number one thing is the housing. I see housing as a very fundamental, important thing. And I see housing as something that actually can potentially improve people's well-being and health, and is connected to a lot of things around even obesity, access to education, and access to good employment as well. If the housing is not sorted, then yeah, I'm really on a hand on the third party this time around. At the moment, there's nothing. Maybe they will present something that I will say, yeah, wow, this one is great. But since the number one issue for me is housing, and I'm saying to you, housing, none of the major party have actually put anything that is credible around housing that I can vote for. So that means I've got no other choice but to look for the third party.
You've studied economies around the world. What when you look at Australia, what do you think the end game is for housing? Like, or does it just keep slowly grinding up forever?
No end game. This is just petty politics, caressing the ears of the middle ground, and with policies that are catastrophic for the middle ground in the long term. The problem that Australia has is, we need in Australia over the next 2 years, 3 years, we need 1 million homes. That's what we need. We need to increase supply. This is not happening, neither by the private sector nor the public sector. So anything that boosts demand is going to make the problem of affordability worse. And to expect the productive sectors of the economy, especially the ones that are in high-tech, what is left of the high-tech Australian industry, the ones that are going to be producing value in the future, right? To expect them to subsidize the increasing spiral of house prices in Australia is insane. You should be screaming from the rooftops. Stop doing this. Let's find a way of building private and public housing to the tune of 1 million homes to expand supply. That's what needs to happen. And, at some point, when I moved out of Australia in 2000, as you kindly reminded our viewers, one of the things I didn't miss, I missed a lot of things about Australia, but the one thing I didn't miss was the dinner party conversations about real estate. It's a nation that is caught up in a frenzy of orchestrated idiocy, of talking about houses as investments. Houses should be places where we live, and investment should be going into the things that produce future value. Houses do not produce future value. They can produce economic rent, which comes at the expense of the dynamism of one's macroeconomy.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys for listening. Until next time, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Press the like button, the bell, so you'll be notified when I post a new video. Until next time, see ya.